podcast, the Heidelcast.
It's a Heidelminicast. And now, Scott Clark.
Should Dave attend a wedding between his non-religious niece and a Muslim man? Answers coming up shortly.
If the Heidelcast helps you, won't you help us keep it going? Please make the coffer clink by clicking on the PayPal link or by sending a check to Heidelberg Reformation Association, 1637 East Valley Parkway, number 391, Escondido, California, 92027.
Got some letters.
And we do, and this one is from Dave, as I say, who says, "Hi, with the Alistair Begg controversy dominating the airwaves, I've been attempting to seek clarity on how it applies, if it even does, to my circumstances. My Christian community has been less clear, and that has greatly added to my confliction." I think that's a noun, confliction, or at least a conflict. I need to look that up. I kind of like that word. My niece, whom I love dearly, and who is also non-religious, is going to marry a Muslim man this summer. I really don't know what all that entails, and as a Christian, I am conflicted on whether or not I should partake. Any clarity you can offer or point me to would be greatly appreciated. Thanks. Well, this is a very interesting question. I appreciate this, Dave. It's we do face lots of challenges now in sort of the post-Christian West. How are we going to navigate this? And good people are going to come down on different sides on these things, and we're going to have to learn to, I think, to a certain degree, tolerate one another, accept one another as we disagree on things that rely on inferences, and sometimes inferences from inferences. So this is probably the second time I've dealt with this kind of question, and if you want to know where I came out on the sort of Alistair Begg controversy 10 years before it occurred, because, we were already dealing with the Alistair Begg thing, or with the question, I should say, that Alistair was trying to address, 10 years ago, because you could see it coming, and I'm sure I was responding to a question that I had gotten. So there's earlier Heidelcast on this. Should Christians attend a gay wedding is the title, and you can easily find it, heidelblog.net/Heidelcast. All the mini-casts are there, and you can get it there. And then the original piece was, you've been invited to a fill-in-the-blank. Should you go? And I tried to give people a rubric, a way to think about these issues, a framework within which to think about these issues. And so that's how I... that's my guidance. But on this particular issue, so there's a difference between non-religious, as Dave says, female marrying a Muslim man and two people of the same sex, or now two people, of indeterminate sexual identity, or two trans people, or whatever people are doing now, or, people engaged in polyamory, or, whatever is happening now. As you hear this, wherever the culture has gone, those are different things than two heterosexual people getting married, one non-religious and one Muslim. I take it that the Muslim fellow is not super orthodox, that he's maybe been Americanized to some degree or something like that. And so he doesn't expect his wife to be religious, or maybe because he got her to say the Shahada. There's no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet. If you say that in some circles, bang, you're a Muslim, sort of ex opera, operato, sort of magically. Maybe that's how that works. I don't know what the details are. But at least I say it's a heterosexual wedding. And that's something. I mean, we can't... we laugh because we have to, but that's not nothing. More seriously, the fact that it is a heterosexual wedding is significant because that makes it a natural marriage. And that's important because marriage is, in the first instance, a creational institution. And this is something, a category that a lot of evangelicals lack, because in their theology, creation, when they think of creation, they think of, 6 24-hour days. They don't think of a category of existence, or a category in which we live, right? We have we Christians, we humans, we live in both nature and grace. We have obligations to creation as such and to grace. And grace doesn't transform everything. It transforms believers, it transforms the elect, but it doesn't transform plumbing. It doesn't wipe out nature. So there are still natural laws. There are creational, natural patterns that were instituted in creation. So if you want to know more about this, you can go to heidelblog.net/resources and look at the resources on natural law, on the twofold kingdom, on nature and grace. We have resources on all of that. These are really important traditional Christian categories and distinctions that some of us are trying to help recover for Christians and specifically for those who confess the Reformed faith so that we can live more faithfully, live more wisely, so that Christians don't make unnecessary mistakes. It was the Anabaptists who thought, for example, that grace wipes out everything and therefore marriage is only for Christians. And that simply isn't true. In fact, there were Reformed churches that rebuked the Anabaptists for saying that marriage was only for Christians. It's true that marriage does for Christians signify the relationship between Christ and his church. That is true. But that doesn't mean that is all that marriage is or does. That might be the highest aspect of marriage, we might say that, but it's not the only aspect of marriage. Marriage was, as our Lord Jesus reminded the scribes and the Pharisees, instituted by God in creation. And that's why when they tried to trip him up about divorce, he said it was not so from the beginning. He went back to creation and he normed and regulated the Mosaic exceptions. God granted, he said, divorce the way that he did, for the hardness of their hearts, but it was not so from the beginning. So Moses was temporary, he was saying, and the creational pattern, male and female, he made them and gave them to each other in marriage. That is the natural pattern, that's the creational pattern, that's the divinely instituted pattern, but that's true for all human beings. And not just for Christians. So I remember thinking, as a young evangelical, just on the verge of becoming Reformed, I was talking to a dear Orthodox Presbyterian pastor friend as I was living in Oregon for a little while, and he was sort of tutoring me, mentoring me, being very gracious with his time and teaching me. And I said, well, I don't see why non-Christians even get married. And he said, well, you don't understand common grace. And that was certainly true. I would rather say, use the more, maybe the older language, more traditional language, you don't understand the distinction between nature and grace. What he was really saying very politely is you still think like a Baptist, that grace in your theology has wiped out nature. You don't have any place for nature. And that was true. I didn't. And that's true for a lot of people. A lot of people who for whatever reason, they can't just have plumbers. They have to have Christian plumbers. They can't have, bakers. They have to have Christian bakers because there's Christian baking and Christian plumbing. Well, of course, there isn't. There's baking and there's plumbing. There are Christians who bake and there are Christians who plumb, but there isn't any sensible, reasonable way of talking about Christian baking, Christian plumbing that doesn't really fall into a kind of Gnosticism, kind of secret knowledge that only, 5 Illuminati have. And so we want to avoid that kind of thing, that sort of quasi-Gnostic way of talking and thinking. And so it is, a creational pattern for these to get married now. Obviously, we want two things. First of all, we want these two to come to true saving knowledge of Christ. And so we with Dave ought to pray that his non-religious niece and her Muslim fiance should come to a knowledge of the greatness of their sin and misery. The Muslim fellow almost certainly is confused about who Jesus is, and it could well be the non-religious niece is also confused about who Jesus is. The Muslim is taught by his imam in the mosque and in the Quran that Jesus is merely a prophet, that he is not God the Son, and that he did not die, and therefore he was not raised on the third day, and he's not ascended and seated. He's just one in a line of prophets. He's an honored prophet to a degree, but he is succeeded by the prophet, Muhammad. And so he is not himself even the prophet. And so the Muslims deny cardinal Christian truth and biblical truth. They think that it was Simon the Cyrene who was crucified and not Jesus. And of course, we know from the Gospels, which few Muslims actually read and know, that it was Jesus of Nazareth who carried the cross partway up the hill up Golgotha, and it was Simon who carried it the rest of the way, but it was Jesus of Nazareth who was nailed to that cross, and it was he who cried out, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? It was he who breathed his last. It was he who died, and having died, he was removed from the cross, and he was wrapped in burial cloths and was buried and was raised again on the third day. When the women came, they found the tomb empty and the burial clothes very neatly folded at the sort of the head of the tomb. And, for whom are you looking? He's not here. Jesus isn't here. He's been raised. And so he has. And 40 days later, he was ascended to the right hand of the Father, where he is now, and whence he shall return in glory to judge the living and the dead. All those who have believed and who have not believed, and those who have believed, their names are written in the book of life, and those who have not believed, their names are written in another book, a book where you don't want your name written. So we ought to pray that both of them come to a knowledge of the greatness of their sin and misery, and hence a knowledge of Jesus as the true and only Savior, God the Son incarnate, who obeyed for all his people, was crucified for them, was raised for them, was ascended for them, and is saving them and is coming for them again in his glorious bodily return.
Call or text now, 760-618-1563.
So what about Dave's question, his niece and this fellow, should he go? And my answer is yes. As Christians, we understand, as I say, marriage signifies more than our pagan or our unbelieving neighbors think, but that doesn't mean that they have to affirm everything that we affirm in order for us to go and be a witness to this natural creational union. And so I think there is an argument for Dave to go, that he's free to go, that he ought to hope that it's a joyous time, and that his niece and her fiancé sees something in Dave that's different, and that he might even have opportunity to give witness to them as to what marriage signifies to Christians, the union of Christ and his church, and that they might want more than just this life, or more than the fatalism of Islam and the sort of moralism of Islam. That would be my answer. I can understand why Christians would dissent, and if you do, feel free to make a comment, since this is now, as you're hearing this, posted at heidelblog.net. And if you have a different point of view, you're welcome to express it calmly, reasonably, and persuasively.
Thanks for listening. Tune in tomorrow for more from the Heidelcast, brought to you by HeidelbergReformationAssociation.org. Don't forget, when the coin in the coffer clinks, the cost of bandwidth shrinks. Copyright Heidelberg Reformation Association. All rights reserved. This is a Heidelmedia production.
The best podcast